On today's episode of Locked On Mariners, it's time we talk about GM speak and the dangers of buying in too much on it. Plus, a big blow to the bullpen just re-emphasizes an often overlooked need for the Mariners at the deadline. All that and more coming up. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Locked On Mariners podcast. It is Thursday, July 28th, 2022, and thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all platforms with new episodes dropping every Monday through Friday. I am your host, Diego Gonzalez, joined as always by my co-host, Colby Patnode. We cover the Mariners over at InsideTheMariners.com for Fan Nation over on the Sports Illustrated Network. Be sure to follow the show on Twitter at LO_Mariners. Follow Inside the Mariners at Inside Mariners. You can follow me at Dane Gonzalez, SDANEGNZLZ, and Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. Be sure also check out our Patreon over at patreon.com/control the zone. We post 2 additional podcasts on there every single week. Again, that is patreon.com/control the zone. And if this is your first time joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast, welcome to the show. If you like what you hear, give us a follow or subscribe wherever you're listening to this. And if you're watching us on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and give this video a thumbs up. We greatly appreciate it. So Jerry DiPoto made some comments on 710 Seattle Sports today that has Mariners fans riled up, at least some Mariners fans riled up. And I'm going to tell you why there's no need to get all excited about that. We got 5 days left of the trade deadline. Let's just relax. I'll tell you why later on in the show. We're also going to look at, or well, rather talk about Jeff Passen's comments on 710 Seattle Sports yesterday as well. He had some pretty interesting things to say about the Mariners and what he expects from the Mariners at the deadline. And but first, we need to get into this injury news for the Mariners that unfortunately came down earlier today. Right-handed reliever Diego Castillo is heading to the injured list with right shoulder inflammation, and Matt Brash has been called back up in a corresponding move. And of course, this seems like something that may have been expected here over the last couple days. Of course, Castillo struggled in his last appearance against the Rangers. He was unavailable yesterday. And apparently, according to Benjamin Ranieri, who we, of course, had at the ballpark this past weekend for Inside the Mariners, said that Castillo wasn't even with the bullpen, sitting out in the bullpen for the last week or so. So it seems like he's maybe been dealing with stuff, getting treatment during games, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now he's unfortunately on the injured list. And Colby, this just greatly emphasizes a need that I felt was already present for the Mariners. I felt that they needed to add to the bullpen, but this just emphasizes that even more, right?
Yeah, I mean, Matt Besta certainly has the stuff to just kind of slide right into Castillo's role and be good at it, but you can't trust the control or the command right now. Eric Swanson he's been pretty good, but not quite as good as he was pre his IL stint. So he's kind of tough to trust in that, 8th, 9th inning type of high leverage role. So really you're down to Andres Munoz and Paul Sewald. And even Sewald's been a bit sketchy at times this year. Overall, still very good, but, seems to get into a lot of 3-ball counts, giving up a little bit more hard contact this year, it seems, susceptible to the home run on occasion. So, yeah, the Mariners bullpen, I'd still classify it as good, but I see a lot of people, they throw around the numbers since like May 23rd or something like that. And it's like, oh, the Mariners have the best bullpen in the American League. No, they don't. They don't. That was true before the Castillo injury. It's certainly true now. So yeah, the bullpen is an area of need. And I think there are actually a couple ways to address that. You can go add a starter, take away, the 5-inning starts from let's say Chris Flexen this time, and have a reliever go and have a starter who can frequently go 6 or 7. That's fewer innings your bullpen needs to cover. You could also go get a couple of middle guys and kind of play matchup in the 6th, 7th inning. Or you can go out and you can get somebody who's as good or better as Diego Castillo, and then Castillo kind of becomes your middle guy if he gets back healthy. It's a shoulder thing, so I want to say if, not when. To be fair, he did deal with the shoulder thing last year and was able to come back. And he was pretty good when he came back. So
yeah, and
we'll
Eric
see.
Swanson dealt with right shoulder inflammation
Right.
earlier this year as well and was able to return from that. So it's definitely not a death knell. It doesn't mean that he's out for the year. It also doesn't mean that he's not out for the year.
It doesn't mean that he'll be back in 15 days.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, even if it did mean he was coming back in 15 days, you still want an arm for those 15 days, as many of those 15 days as you can.
Yeah. Plus, you're on an incredibly difficult road trip beginning today. And that, I mean, not having Diego Castillo taken away from arguably your biggest strength on your team, just in terms of position groups, taken away a big piece from that, while you're going to go into Houston for 4 and New York for 3, that is incredibly scary. So, obviously, if they make a trade today, it's not as if that pitcher is going to be ready to pitch tonight or maybe even tomorrow. But unless he so happens to pitch for the Houston Astros.
Have the Mariners and the Astros ever exchanged like relievers before they played each other?
Imagine the return of Rafael Montero.
Abraham Toro for Rafael Montero. No, but it's still, I mean, the player technically has like 3 days, I think, to report. So yeah, you kind of want that guy coming with you to New York at the very least. We'll see how it goes. There are always relievers that you can grab. They're not going to be terribly expensive, but they're not going to be free, not at the deadline. So it kind of depends on what Jerry is. He looking for Joe Jimenez, or is he looking for Dylan Floro? Is he looking for another Matt Festa, or is he looking for another Andres Munoz? And that'll obviously greatly impact the price tag. But he does need to get something done, because the Mariners they don't have that guy. I like Devin Sweet quite a bit. It doesn't seem like the Mariners are interested in him getting a shot. I like Brian Woo's been great, but he's not ready for the big leagues just yet. And those are I mean, I guess you still have Travis Kuhn, who's really opened up some eyes. So it's not like you don't have anybody that you can throw out there in the bullpen should another injury happen. But you're also, Tommy Malone is still around.
Tommy Malone's still around. Matt Festa's looked really good, at times, but there's also been a little shakiness as well there, So do you maybe, add a guy there and just keep Festa's depth in AAA, or do you move, someone like Festa down the line, or do you move someone like Baraki down the line, etc.? Because there's going to be spots, and ultimately at the end of the day, right, this isn't the only injury that's probably going to happen to the Mariners bullpen.
Ooh.
So
and this is also
guys
where
are going to get opportunities.
This is also where Jerry's creativity can come into play. He can go acquire a starter, maybe who's struggling a little bit right now, and be like, "Hey, we're putting you in the pen." Like that's, I don't have a specific example for you, but that is something that teams do. That's what happened with Drew Pomerantz, right? When he was traded, he was a starter. I think it was the Giants who acquired him. Immediately put him in the bullpen, and then he was just dominant for them. I think it was the Giants and Drew Pomerantz, but that type of stuff does happen, and I wouldn't be surprised if Jerry goes that route, because it's possible that somebody like this year's Pomerantz is actually cheaper than somebody like, Joe Jimenez or Jimenez.
Yeah. So some other names to consider here: Joe Mantiply of the Diamondbacks. I was trying to figure out his name yesterday. I couldn't remember it on air, but I remembered it now. So Joe Mantiply of the Diamondbacks, John Schreiber of the Red Sox, Kyle Finnegan of the Nationals, Will Crowe, Chris Stratton of the Pirates, Daniel Bard of the Rockies, David Robertson of the Cubs, lot of different names that are going to be available, or should at least be available. Marlins have a couple of guys. I mean, really any team, even contenders, might be looking to sell off, a reliever or two, depending on what they are particularly looking for, and if they have excess there. Certainly, because that can help them, that can help teams get a bench bat. That can help, and honestly, I was even entertaining the idea of the Mariners potentially doing that before this injury happened, where I was thinking, well, maybe the Mariners would actually trade from their major league bullpen to go help them get maybe like a backup catcher or something. Maybe they would trade like a Matt Festa or a Eric Swanson or someone like that to go get, an offensive player that helps them, that lengthens their bench a little bit. So, really any team is technically on the table when it comes to relievers, I would say, because you never know. I mean, like the Astros and the Mariners made a reliever-based trade near the deadline last year, and no one saw that coming. So there's always that to look out for. But yeah, the Mariners have to add to the bullpen. I feel like that would be a massive mistake on the Mariners' part, on Jerry DiPoto's part, to leave this deadline without adding something to the bullpen, without bolstering it a little further. Because again, guys are going to get opportunities some way, somehow. I know that it looks like they are deep in the bullpen. I know some fans feel that way. But having depth is nice as well. Having depth that you can rely on when injuries occur, because injuries are going to occur, unfortunately. It's just the nature of things. Having that depth is massive.
Mm-hmm.
So, with the deadline coming up, we are 5 days away now, and Jerry DiPoto is starting to do more radio interviews, more television interviews. He's constantly being asked about, his feelings on the market and his feelings on what his team needs. But this is the time of year now, especially when we're talking about buyers, that you can't really believe anything that anyone says. You can't believe what a buyer says to the media around this time of year. We're going to talk about why in just a moment, but real quick, a reminder, this episode of Locked On Mariners is brought to you by the Sports Card Investor app. And once again, we, as we mentioned earlier on in the show, we're giving away a signed Mitch Haniger card once we reach 2,411 subscribers on YouTube. So subscribe if you haven't, and you'll be entered automatically. And now, this is far from the first card giveaway we've done. We like cards, and if you like cards, we have a great new app to tell you about, the Sports Card Investor app. It is a one-stop shop for all your card collecting needs. You can check the market activity and trends for over 630,000 cards, see all the eBay listings, and make purchases right through the app. And if you want to find the going rates for Julio Rodriguez, Ty France, Logan Gilbert, and other Mariners cards, and even scoop some up for yourself, you can find all the info you need on the Sports Card Investor app right now on your mobile device, available for free on the Google Play and Apple App stores, or you can go to sportscardinvestor.com/locked on. Speaking of that giveaway, I believe last time I checked, we're only about 8 subscribers away. So Colby, say bye to Mitch, because I think he's out of here.
Oh no. Not Mitch. I love Mitch.
Colby and his 200 burner accounts are suddenly going to unfollow the channel on right before midnight on August 1st.
Maybe we'll see.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
The great withdrawal, let's call it.
So thank you so much for listening to Locked On Mariners, and thank you for making us your first listen of the day. The MLB Trade Deadline is, of course, August 2nd, and Locked On MLB has all the breakdowns, and Locked On Mariners will have rapid reactions to any move made. Subscribe now to your favorite Locked On MLB team on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, so you get notified when each episode premieres. So again, with the deadline fast approaching, we have to keep, and I'm talking about we as fans here, all of us collectively as Mariner fans, as a fan of a team that is going to buy, we have to be very, very wary of the things that we hear in the media, both from the team itself and members of the team and members of the media as well. because some reports are out there just for the sake of teams trying to inflate costs, right? Trying to garner more interest, or trying to generate more buzz that really isn't there and drive up the cost of their players for negotiations with other teams, right? So sometimes if you hear that the Mariners are involved in negotiations with a team, that's not always 100% true. It's possible that they called. It's possible that they checked in, but that might be the extent of it. But now that team can go and tell a Jeff Passen or a Bob Nightingale or whatever, yeah, the Mariners are in. They're in. They're in on this guy. They're in on Juan Soto. They're in on Xander Bogaerts, etc. Right? But they may not actually be. So we should be wary. And when we hear that maybe the Mariners are close to acquiring a certain player, it doesn't automatically mean that they've landed that player.
Right.
And, sometimes things are wrong. Reports, wrong reports are made. I mean, hell, a couple of years ago, or what was it, last year, it was reported that Scherzer was going to the Padres, right? He wasn't going to the Padres. It's the Dodgers. So it just, those things happen. We have to keep that in mind. We have to be very cautious. We have to be very much on our toes around this time of year. And there's, of course, the fake accounts as well. If you're on social media, if you're on Twitter, there are going to be fake accounts that say, like, oh, yeah, the Mariners traded for Juan Soto and Xander Bogaerts. All in the same trade, somehow. They figured it out. They got both of them in the same trade. And, yeah, that's definitely not true. But the other side of that as well is what the general manager, or in this case, the president of baseball operations, has to say about his team's interests. And if you're a buyer in a market that is being deemed a seller's market, you are going to want to play things very close to the vest. And today, Jerry DiPoto on 710 Seattle Sports talked about, or was asked by Mike Salk, about, his feelings about the team and where things stand heading into the trade deadline. And to basically keep a long story short here, Jerry more or less said that, he more or less just left it up to interpretation. He said things like, I don't want to have to send players down to Tacoma. He more or less acted as if he's okay with the way the roster is currently constructed. At least that could give that impression. And at least that's the impression that has been left on a lot of Mariners fans right now on social media. But the thing is, that is wrong. That is wrong. It's pixie dust. It's fictional. It means nothing. What Jerry DiPoto said on 710 Seattle Sports Today means literally nothing. It means absolute diddly squat. He's not going to go out and say, well, yeah, we're going to send this guy down, and we're going to send this guy down, and we're going to send this guy down because we're going to be adding this guy and this guy and this guy. He's not going to say that.
Right. He's also not going to say he's desperate to make trades. He doesn't believe in the group he has now. Yeah. He's not going to say those things. Why should he? No GM in baseball is going to go around and say those things 3 days before the deadline, 5 days before the deadline, whatever it is. That's just not how it works. And you have to be really careful here when you see Jeff Passen or even the big guys, Passen, Rosenthal, Morosi. You trust them a little bit more than you would trust guys like Nightingale or who. But it's still not. It's just really hard to. The Mariners are very quiet, right? They always have been. Even last year, the Kendall Graveman trade, I think, got officially broken by, I think it was Shannon Drayer, and it was like a minute before the Mariners put out the official release. So it's just one of those things where the Mariners don't leak. So if you're hearing things about the Mariners from national media folks, understand that is probably coming from teams not named the Seattle Mariners. It's coming from other front offices. So, and Jerry's radio interview this morning is the reason why. They just don't want to talk about it. I feel like Jerry's very open when you're talking about like broad topics here, but the trade deadline really is anything but broad. And when you're asking like, what's your strategy? How are things looking? Blah, blah, blah. Jerry's not going to be like, well, we're trying to get Ian Happ, but here's what they want. And we're just not willing to do it. It's just not what GMs do.
And it's
So
also a lot easier to be open about transactions, stuff like that, about the temperature of the market during free agency and when these things are spread out, not when there's like 5 days to go until the trade deadline and you and 7 other teams are basically competing for trading for Luis Castillo or Frankie Montas or what have you, right? Like,
right.
he's not going to say anything about that. He's not even going to let on to the fact that they're going to do a single thing at the trade deadline. And no, that does not mean that they're going to stand pat. The Seattle Mariners are not going to stand pat at the deadline. They're not. That's just not going to happen. I'm just going to tell you that right now. I know that, you know, it's easy to be pessimistic in this fan base right now because of the 20 years of misery and blah, 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 blah. The issue with that, though, is this is a different regime. These are different circumstances. These are like everything about this from the last time that you can remember the Mariners truly being able to compete, and everything that was in place at that time has changed, right? Like it is severely changed over even since 2016, 2018, when they were in the thick of things. They didn't have a great farm system to trade from. They had to kind of pick around the edges and just try, you know, things that, you know, and hopefully that would work out for them, right? You know, the Santu Ivalala trades of the world, right? It's like that's the best that they could do. Adam Warren, etc. Cameron Maben, you know, that was the best that they could do at that time, you know. But like now, they have such a, you know, a great farm system to trade from. They have payroll, or at least, you know, in theory, they have payroll. Like, they are going to be able to do things. They're going to be able to do things. This is just a different time. These are different circumstances, and they're not going to let this moment pass by. They're just not. That makes no sense. And if they do, I will eat crow. I will absolutely eat crow next week on the show. But I feel more than confident that the Mariners are going to be able to do something, and something significant, over the next 5 days, and be able to really bolster this roster. And I think anyone who doubts that is not really living in reality here, because this is just a different time. It's a different time from any other time that you can remember with the Mariners competing near the deadline, where they could actually feasibly buy at the deadline. It's just different. Every single circumstance with this is different. It's more beneficial for the Mariners in every single way. They're in such a great spot to be able to add impact. And I feel so confident that they're going to be able to do that. So confident. So I just don't blow this up. Don't let this drive you to a place where you automatically think the Mariners are going to be cheap. They are going to be complacent. And they just feel that they're going to be able to succeed with what they have in place. The Mariners are not stupid. They know that they have holes. They know that they have needs to be addressed. They're not going to let that slide by. They're not. No. They're not.
No. You know, it's there's a large contingent of same old Mariner fans who won't even wait until the team actually does or doesn't do something before they criticize the team for not doing or doing something. You know, they're not willing to wait to let this thing play out. But it's not like there's been a flurry of moves and the Mariners are just sitting there, right? There's been one major deadline trade, just happened last night. It was a player the Mariners were not connected to whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we still have teams like San Francisco, like Boston, like Chicago, Cleveland, that just won't sell. And if teams don't believe that they are selling, the other sellers, their prices are still going to remain remarkably high. When will those prices go down? July 31st, August 1st, August 2nd. Mm-hmm. That's when the prices will start to go down. So it might be another 3 days before we hear anything. It might be deadline day before the Mariners make their move. But the Mariners are going to do something. Now, whether or not it's going to be enough, whether it's not, it's going to be something that we like, I don't know. I'm not in those rooms, but neither are you. And so this idea that, you know, the Mariners aren't going to do anything, based on what? The long, extensive history of Jerry Dipoto sitting on his hands? Like, what are we talking about here? Of course, Jerry's going to do something. Of course, he's going to downplay his interest in anybody. And it's just funny because like last week, Jerry gets on there and he says, well, we definitely want to add somebody to the top of our rotation, and we want to add somebody to kind of share the load with George Kirby at the back end. And so it's like, do you think that in a week he's completely changed his mind on that? Or do you think it's just we're getting closer and closer? The prices have remained super, super high, and Jerry's going to start to play the game like the other general managers are. Like the Cubs think they are by saying, oh, well, we might not trade Ian Happ. Like, okay, sure.
Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean? So it's one of those, every GM is playing a game right now. It's very similar to the NFL draft where everything gets leaked and, oh no, these pictures of this guy doing something dumb for a college kid got leaked or it's just every team is trying to use the media to their advantage. So that all the leaks are strategic, all the reports are strategic. They're all being leaked for a reason, right? They are not just, it's the Red Sox aren't like, oh, well, let's be nice to John Morosi and tell him we're going to trade Nathan Eovaldi. Of course, they're not going to say, they're going to be like, oh no, we like Nathan. We still think we can compete here. We're going to keep trying and sign him this offseason. And why would they do that? So that other teams go, oh, well, maybe they'll keep him. And it doesn't work. It's a stupid game. And every GM knows the other GM is playing it, but they all play it. So there's no reason not to. So it's going to be fine, guys. Just relax. Maybe they don't do exactly what you want them to do. They're going to do something. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. And the thing too, right, is like, I've been seeing a lot of, and this is why I wanted to emphasize the fact that I feel confident that they're going to add impact to this team. It's because I see a lot of folks on Twitter right now saying, well, I've set my expectations now to they're just going to get Tyler Anderson again, this year's equivalent of Tyler Anderson and Abraham Toro. And that's it. Okay. Yeah. Again, let's talk about circumstances being a lot different. Even last year, circumstances were a lot different. First of all, you didn't have a superstar in tow. Second of all, you didn't win 18 of your last 21. Third of all, you weren't in a wild card spot at the time. You were training and you were in the middle of like 6 other teams. You're like where the White Sox and the Orioles and those guys are at right now. Like,
yeah, exactly.
You were that team last year. You were not the team that everyone is chasing. So things are different here. Things are very, very much different here. So the opportunity is right there for Jerry Dipoto and company. It is right there. It is right there for grabs. And if they don't take it, absolutely, we're going to criticize them. Absolutely. Like, if they don't take advantage of this opportunity, if they do just add their equivalent of like Abraham Toro and Tyler Anderson this year, they're going to get criticized by us, by everyone. But right now, there's 5 days left until the deadline. Let's not assume anything until the deadline actually happens and passes.
Yep.
It's not. So I want to quickly talk about Jeff Passen's comments before we hop off here, because he was on Seattle Sports yesterday as well with Mike Salk and said a lot of interesting things about the Mariners and what he expects the Mariners to do this offseason, or not this offseason, this trade deadline rather. And I think the really the big thing that came from this, aside from him saying that they're not in on Soto, or at least he doesn't expect them to be in on Soto because of everything that, we have said here. He mentioned the George Kirby or Logan Gilbert thing, that it's probably going to take one of those guys. And at that point, that, according to him, torpedoes any deal for the Mariners. So aside from that, though, the really interesting thing that he said was that he feels that the Mariners are going to be very, very, very aggressive at the deadline. One of the most aggressive teams at this year's deadline. And part of that, he says, is because he feels that there's a little bit of a little bit more of a driving force there because of the 20-year playoff drought than there would be if they were just in this position that they're in right now in a wild card spot without a 20-year playoff drought. That's certainly adding something to their aggressiveness. Do you buy that at all, Colby?
A little, but I don't think it's the main motivation for their aggressiveness. I think the reason the Mariners are going to be as aggressive as Passen is saying he believes they'll be, is because they're in a playoff position. It's like you said, it's different from last year where they were trying to catch 3 teams and they were 4 games back at the deadline. They are 3 games up from, the last team out or the first team out of the playoffs. So they have a bit of a cushion. And not only that, they have a shot to, win the number 1 wild card, a pretty good one, which would mean home playoff games, not just getting to the playoffs, but getting to home playoff games. So I believe that's the motivation for their aggression, more so than, we have to end this playoff drought, because I obviously they want to. It's one thing you can check off the list. It's a major bonus towards your rebuild. It's kind of a validation of everything you've done over the last, 3+ years. So I do think it's part of it, but I don't think the fact that it's been 20 years matters. If it had been 10 years or 5 years or 3 years, even, I still think they would be just as aggressive. So I do believe that there is, yes, obviously the 20-year playoff drought, they want to end that. Of course they do. Is it maybe make them a little more willing to overspend slightly? Maybe, but is it the number 1 primary reason? No. I think the number 1 primary reason that Seattle's going to be aggressive at the deadline this year is because they think they're a good team who can make a deep playoff run if they are aggressive. So that to me is the number 1 motivator for Jerry Dipoto and his crew. It's not just to get into the playoffs, because they could stand pat and have a decent shot of getting in. They need some health luck and things like that, but they're in a pretty good spot right now. So if it was just about breaking the drought, they could just go out and they can get, a reliever and a Tyson and probably be fine and probably, sneak in the hang on in the wild card. That's not what they're going after. We've heard them linked to Pablo Lopez and Frankie Montes and Juan Soto and, Luis Castillo. Apparently they're still very aggressive on him, and Brandon Drury. We've heard them connected to just about every big name that's out there right now. So to me, that doesn't scream our main motivation is to sneak into the playoffs. To me, we feel good about ourselves. We think we're in a really good position to make the playoffs. Let's not only improve our odds of making the playoffs, let's actually give ourselves a chance to make a deep playoff run. Why not?
Yeah.
So I think that's their motivation more so than just getting into the playoffs. I think they're looking at it and saying, well, we feel like we're a playoff team right now. How do we get as close to possible to be a World Series contender? How do we get to an ALCS? Yeah. I think that's the motivation right now.
Well, yeah, and that's what you want the motivation to be. You want to win now. You want to win now. You want to be able to do damage. You don't want to just show up to the party and leave after 5 minutes. You want to get in. You want to dance your tail off. You want to be able, and you have the pieces in place. You have a superstar and Julio Rodriguez on your team right now. You want to, take advantage of that. Take advantage of that. Take advantage of the fact that you have guys like Ty France on your team right now performing at career high levels. Take advantage of the fact that you have someone like Eugenio Suarez. Take advantage of the fact that you've been remarkably healthy in your rotation. Take advantage of the fact that you have a strong bullpen, an above average bullpen. Take advantage of all that and then further build upon that. Because the sky's the limit at any point. At any point. So once you get to the postseason, anything can happen. Anything can happen. Absolutely anything can happen. Get there and build yourself. And this is why I said, yesterday, this is why you and I both said on yesterday's show that pitching is so important. Pitching is so important because it's so important in the postseason. So getting pitching at the deadline right now has to be priority number 1 for the Mariners. Has to be. Because pitching is so damn important, and it's so right now as it's currently constructed. So many things have gone in the right direction for the Mariners. It's just you don't want to have to put all your eggs in the basket of that just continuing.
Right. Like you said, anything can happen when you get into the playoffs. The 85-win Atlanta Braves won the World Series last year. How did they do that? Did they make some big, huge, splashy deal at the deadline? No, they pitched and they added around the fringes. Ronald Acuna went down. Their star went down. And they went and they got Eddie Rosario and Jorge Soler and I don't even know. And then they just pitched their butts off. And they got in. Enough hitters got hot. Pitching continued to be dominant. They have a World Series ring as a result. So Anything can happen once you get in if you have the starting pitching. That's the addendum.
And that's a
I
good
don't know if the
reminder
Mariners have it
too.
yet.
That's a good reminder too that if the Mariners add someone, maybe in the outfield or in the infield, someone that isn't a huge name though, it's not Xander Bogaerts, it's not Juan Soto, that doesn't mean that they failed. Again, the Braves added Adam Duvall and Eddie Rosario and Jorge Soler, and those three guys massively helped them win a World
They
Series
came up
last year.
huge.
So just because the Mariners
playoffs.
maybe if the Mariners only come away from this deadline with, a big name starting pitcher, but they walk away with like Brandon Drury Drury could massively help them. Donovan Solano could really help them. There's a lot of guys that are, that you're not even thinking about right now. Yeah, exactly. So
Brian Anderson, Miguel Rojas, like if they go get a Pablo Lopez or a Tariq Skubal or Frankie Montes, Cassie, you guys know the names by now. They go get one of those guys, and they get just even a platoon guy who can maybe help you, or maybe it's some outfield defense for late in games. Maybe it's Kevin Kiermaier's injured, but somebody like Kiermaier who can hit a little, but is mostly defensively. Those guys can make massive differences because once you get into a position where you're talking about not just getting into the playoffs, but trying to win series, those little things like the guy who can steal a bag off the bench, the guy who can come in and play left field for Jesse Winker, those things tend to add up. And while they're not as valuable as, hey, we're going Ray, Gilbert, Lopez twice in this 7-game series, obviously that's more important. But those little tiny things that you can add at the deadline make a huge difference. It's why Terrence Gore is on every World Series team for the last decade, it seems. So yeah, don't discount those smaller moves because they can really help you in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think the moral of this episode today is don't assume anything until you actually see it. Don't assume that the Mariners are not going to do anything because of something Jerry Dipoto said on the radio. Don't assume that the Mariners failed the deadline just because they didn't add Juan Soto or Xander Bogaerts, right? Don't assume anything until you actually see it unfold. So again, wait until the deadline before you make any statements about the Mariners and the Mariners front office and everything like that. Don't just assume that it's going to be the same as always. I think that's really the big thing for Mariners fans in general, right? With just this season as a whole, everyone doesn't want to get hurt right now. Everyone doesn't want to buy in too much because this team has just consistently disappointed over the last 20 years. I get it. But this is different. It's a new year, new circumstances, new everything. And so, that doesn't, like, whatever happened in the past doesn't matter. It doesn't. It's irrelevant. It means nothing. It really doesn't. It really, really means nothing. So again, do not assume anything until, you see how it actually turns out. I think that's the thing that we all need to do here. So that's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at @LO_Mariners. You can follow Inside the Mariners at Inside Mariners. You can follow me at Dane Gonzalez, that's DaneGNZLZ, and Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. And thank you again for making us your first listen of the day. Now make your second listen the Locked On MLB podcast. MLB expert Paul Francis Sullivan brings humor, passion, and unique perspective on every team and the biggest stories around the league. Follow the #1 daily league-wide podcast, Locked On MLB, on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts, just like us. And with that, have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Peace.